Well, good morning, everybody, and you are very welcome to another episode of Business Block. Today, my guest is Orlagh Gahan-Reid. Gahan was her maiden name, so sometimes you will see her come up online under her maiden name as well. She is a psychotherapist and a very interesting woman indeed, because she just doesn't cover one or two disciplines. She goes right across the board. She deals with recovery from all kinds of different addictions. It could be sex addiction, it could be infidelity and illness recovery, it could be gambling addiction. It's a whole plethora of areas that she has expertise in. So I'm really delighted to have her on the show today. Orlagh, welcome to Business Block.
Thanks a million. Thanks for having me. You make me sound very interesting there, Miriam.
You are.
Thanks for having me.
So you have a website and it's orlaghreid.ie, isn't that correct?
It's actually orlaghgahan.ie. Orlagh Reid is in development at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So orlaghgahan.ie at the moment. This is one of I've had this issue as well in my life where my name is O'Gara. My maiden name is O'Gara, and then I've got married and I've wondered, should I switch it over? But actually I've gone back to the Irish one, to O'Gara. I think it's something that men don't understand this.
No, I don't think so. And it's one of the challenges, I think, of working for yourself and then transitioning into a married name. It's a long time. It takes a long time to make that break and move across. So it's taken me a while. I'm a little bit slow on that one, I have to say.
I find as well that it became a little bit more complicated once the millennium came and people started to use the internet more, and then went on 10 years later to start using social media more. That all of your history going back pre-millennium starts to come back under your maiden name. And then you have to ask the question, right, professional name, what am I going to go with as a professional name? And sometimes you just have to make a choice, don't you? And it could go either way.
Yeah, and especially when you're building, like I am my own brand. So when you're building your own brand, having to switch names, there is a fear of kind of a loss of identity there. And then when you're writing on a blog, if you get rid of that website, do you lose all that work that you've put into it? So yeah, it's a bit of a decision to make, I have to say. So I haven't quite made it yet. I'm working on it.
Yeah, and it is an area, I suppose it's a counselling area in its own right, isn't it? Because it's about identity, and it's about how do I draw together the threads of my life, under these different names, because they all mean something. They all have value, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I really like my new surname, I have to say. I've used it personally from the get-go, so I'm quite happy to transition into that. But professionally, I'm a little bit slow to move across. Yeah. And people know you as Orlagh Gahan, and I think, like, in this business, developing strong kind of colleagues, peers, different relationships, they know you by your original name. So yeah, it is a big, huge part of your identity.
It really is, yeah, and yet you're sending out a signal that I am part of another network of people now. I'm part of another family too. So it's actually all positives. It's just getting it to work with social media and online today.
That's it.
But you have this incredible business. So can you take us there now? Your area of expertise is quite amazing, because you deal, as we were saying before, in so many different areas, and people can contact you through, you do telephone counselling, you do online counselling, and I've noticed that you use different platforms for both.
I do, yeah. So one of the things that I learned really early on after qualifying is, like, the whole area of counselling and psychotherapy. It's so broad, people could come to you with, in any given day, with 10 different types of issues, and actually that was quite difficult for me. So what I found it much easier to do is try to pick 3 areas that I have an interest in, that I really feel quite strongly and passionate about, and try to work in those areas. But even within those specific areas, it's still very broad, isn't it? Even gambling and the whole area of sexual development, sexual well-being is quite huge. So for me, I guess I'm trying to stick to a few areas, but that's still difficult. There's so many different types of clients come in then as well.
Yeah, I can quite imagine that, because you'll have a client who comes to you, and if they've got to the point where they're struggling with a particular addiction, take a sex addiction, for example,
Yeah.
no doubt there will be others that they're
Yeah.
very tempted into as well. It could be in the area of alcohol. It could be the area of drugs. It could be in a variety of areas, like pornography is something I see you deal with as well.
Yeah. So people will always present with maybe one or two issues, and then behind that, any area of addiction, there's always trauma issues, attachment, family kind of breakdowns, a loss of a sense of self, and I guess a huge isolation. So they might present with maybe an issue around pornography or relationship breakdown, but behind that there could be childhood trauma, depression, loss of job, huge, immense shame, I mean, such a degree of different emotions and problems behind that. So we address what comes into the room initially, and then kind of work our way backwards. So for me, I'm mostly working online now, and I do a little bit of telephone work, but prior to maybe the pandemic, it would have been 90% face-to-face. So it's been a huge transition to, kind of move into the online world and the telephone work. But it's been really successful. And I think as therapists, we have to get better at meeting our clients, that for some of them, it just doesn't suit them to come in face-to-face, or maybe they're just not ready. So it makes it much safer to offer them telephone. A lot of the time, I start with telephone, and then when they're ready, they'll come to the face-to-face online, which is great.
Well, I noticed on your website you mentioned the benefits of actually doing therapy online, and you also mentioned, I thought it was a very good point, apart from the ones that we would normally think about, which is the confidentiality issues and it just being a little bit easier in your own environment to talk to someone over Zoom or whatever. You also mentioned expats, the expat community.
Yeah, there's a lot of expats, and I really feel for them, because they can't get home. My own sister is one. She's in China at the moment. She moved abroad, and so there's an awful lot of people who are kind of displaced around the world, and for them to just hear a local therapist, Irish speaking, that gets them, we have an instant connection, an instant kind of rapport, which is really lovely. So I literally have clients all over the world at the moment. China, some in Australia, a lot in kind of Europe, Norway, Oslo, the UK, and then we've got a lot of people who are traveling as well, so they can still remain really consistent with their therapy and travel. And it's just so easy now, which is, I mean, it's really making the whole area being able to be in therapy and be online just so accessible, and people are doing it from everywhere. It's really interesting. And now I always start my sessions with, so where are you in the world right now? Are you at home? Are you in the office? Are you in a different country? Because people are moving all the time.
Actually, that makes it more interesting to be able to go into a therapist and have them excited about what you're doing rather than being very serious and sitting down.
Yeah.
Did you find that you were nervous going down the online route? Had you tried any of this prior to the pandemic?
I'd been working online for about a year before the pandemic hit, so I kind of was really set already. I'm big into podcasts. I'm real into listening to podcasts. So through listening to them about how to develop a really good kind of therapeutic practice, they were all about, bring your business online, bring it online, be available, be more available, more accessible. So I kind of had all that in place, but a lot of people still want the face-to-face work. But about 2 years ago, I think it was about April last year, once the face-to-face work stopped and all the new clients start to come online, they're happy there. There will always be people who want to be in the room with you. I would be like that in my own personal therapy, but a lot of people now who are starting therapy, they don't know any difference. They've always met with their therapist online. Yeah, so that's great for them. And you can be so much more consistent when you don't have to travel for maybe an hour, or you're not trying to plan your day. So people are engaging. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, you're based in Naas, aren't you, in County Kildare in Ireland? Beautiful area for anyone watching outside of the gorgeous area. Prior to this, were you receiving people in your rooms in Naas, or did you find yourself going to corporate bodies, going into Dublin a lot? Or
I had a practice in Marion Square with another therapist, and we were there for about 3 years, and that was great. A real diverse type of client, and they never really stuck in therapy because they're always trying to fit it in between work or at lunchtime, and people were coming in stressed and they were leaving stressed. So what I did was I moved my practice to Naas. I had 2 children, so I couldn't travel anymore. So for me, just trying to stay local was much easier. And then I moved during the pandemic, which is a really difficult thing to do. So now I live in Cara, just outside Naas. So before, when I had a physical practice, my clients would have been maybe within kind of a 50-kilometer radius. So they might travel for half an hour. So actually my own client base was quite limited, but now that it's online, I guess actually a lot of people from the country want to work with the therapist who's kind of in the Dublin area, because people are so concerned about privacy and the whole social and cultural element. They don't want anybody to know that they're in therapy. So I have loads of clients from Kerry, Cork, Donegal, who are just more comfortable, being with the therapist that they know have no connections.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I can see that, and that's actually something you mentioned on your website too. If I can just go to your website for a moment, I don't know if you can see it there.
I can.
So this is again Orlagh Gahan Therapy for Wellness. That's the title on it. Orlagh Gahan Therapy for Wellness. Absolutely beautiful website. Congratulations! I love this.
Thank you.
I love this. And of course, this is very important. You've had quite a lot of exposure recently. Irish Times article there. How have you found that experience as a business? How have you found that? Just generating interest through other media, by other media.
Yeah, well, I think it has to be said that the only reason that has really happened for me, I know that you're with Women's Inspire Group, is being with the Women's Inspire Group and just having other people who are like, that was Ger Walsh there. She's an incredible writer. She's really passionate about writing for kind of women's health and mental health, all types of health articles. So for me, just being in the Women's Inspire has given me that kind of platform to be able to connect and share my own experience, get involved in articles or different interviews, which has been really great. So, I mean, when you're working alone, it's not that it's a lonely place working on your own, but it's very isolating, So I guess the more you can kind of share your experience and work with other, I don't know whether it's writers or other people who are in this business, it's great for my confidence, but it's also great just for the website to draw people to the website. And for me, I'm really into self-development. And when people are seeking counselling, like nowadays, the first thing they do is they go online, they search therapists, they search couples therapy Kildare or whatever it is, So having, maybe this website where there's blogs and loads of information, that's what brings, my client base to me, really.
Now, you mentioned telephone counselling. Have you found a difference in how that works in practice? Is telephone counselling a different experience to online through Zoom?
Yeah, telephone counselling, it's suitable for most people and most issues. It's not really ideal for people who are in like a real crisis or have huge conflict. It's actually a wonderful experience to sit with people in telephone counselling. Some of the clients that I have at the moment who are telephone counselling, I've had them for quite a long time. It's a very, people really open up. People really, there must be some kind of a safety there. People share so much on the telephone, far more than maybe an online session.
Really?
So it's a really wonderful experience. Yeah. I think maybe there's just obviously a much bigger sense of safety or comfort. You can really connect to people on telephone. I never would have expected that before, but people really get into therapy when it's on the phone. Some transition to online, but some they really just need that space to just hear themselves talk and open up. And there are some issues that work super.
Is it age related at all, the preference for the phone over online?
That's a really good question. No, I haven't noticed. Most most of my clients would be mid-30s, 40s, 50s, 60s actually. So I actually don't have many young clients, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
I always wonder why
then.
that is. Yeah.
It's across the board. Now I see, is it Doxy that you use? Doxy.me?
Doxy, yeah, I use Doxy. It's a great platform, really, really quick. You just literally click on the link, put in your details, and I can see you come into my waiting room on this side. So it's HIPAA compliant, which means that it's completely secure and stable. So it's great, you know. And I guess Zoom is good, but for my clients to just have click on one link, it means there's no scheduling on my side at all. So that's very fast.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now they can also contact you through info@orlaghgahan.ie, which is your website email.
Yeah.
And they can also contact you through Skype. Do you have a preference for Skype as a business person? Do you have a preference for Zoom or Skype? Which tends to get difficulty?
I actually don't really use Skype anymore. I mostly use Doxy, and I use Zoom for like maybe my own supervision or peer support, or, you know, kind of maybe a few interviews like this. But generally, I don't use Skype at all anymore. No, wouldn't usually.
And again, your list here, you give a breakdown of just some of the things. There are many. So you will look at addiction counselling right across the board. So food, alcohol, gambling, substance, sex, pornography. You do fertility, infertility. Now, interesting one there. When you say abstinence and recovery, the abstinence side of that would be, you know, of course, I suppose people usually think of abstinence from sex when they first hear the word abstinence, or perhaps abstinence from alcohol. Does it include anything else that would be important to someone's recovery?
I guess I probably like using the term abstinence, because a lot of people, when it comes to therapy, they often don't really believe that they have a problem, you know. And there's a lot of shame around, you know, and stigma around the concept of having an addiction or being labeled an addict. You know, I'm not one of them. So usually sessions start off very slowly, just talking about, well, look, if this is a problem, why don't we explore what it might mean to be abstinent or to be sober, you know, and really pull away from the whole area of labeling. Or let's just actually, most of the time I'm saying, let's talk more about what recovery means, you know, because really recovery just means kind of restoring to a better place of health, you know, to get healthy, to pull into something that is more about well-being and stability and security and feeling good about yourself. So I think people are sometimes more open to talking about abstinence and recovery than being able to say, well, I'm an addict, because a lot of the time they don't identify with being an addict. Maybe family are telling them they're an addict, but they're actually not there in themselves for quite some time into the therapy process. So I think language is really, really crucial and important, and it has to be really soft, you know, nice, soft approach. You're kind of planting a seed a lot of the time.
Now, you mentioned in your bio that you know, you come from a background of having had to deal with a couple of issues yourself. Would you talk to us a little bit more about that? You did mention panic attacks. I used to suffer from them as well in my 20s.
Yeah. It's funny thing about depression is that you just don't realize that you have it, you know, even though you can see everything is collapsing around you and falling apart around you. You can't, I mean, we function, that's the thing, it's incredible, you know, we still function, we still go to work, you can still have relationships. So I just didn't see it creeping in. I developed depression in my 20s, and I probably had it for maybe 5 or 6 years, a long time, you know. And for me, it started situational, and it was about like too much change and too much stress, and I was traveling and I came home and just not being able to kind of get a handle on life, really. But I would have always been very prone to panic attacks and anxiety. And it's only in the last few years I kind of realized I was actually just born anxious. You know, there's so much talk about anxiety and fixing anxiety, but actually, like, some people we're just born with an anxious nature. We worry and we stress and we kind of catastrophize things. That was me. I was like that from day one, you know. And really nice to just get a grip on that, you know. I can still function, and some situations make it much worse, and then others make it easier. But for me, I think when I developed depression, it came from a period of long-term anxiety and panic attacks. Panic attacks are very they're very physically exhausting. I don't know if you remember, but your body is just fired up all the time. You can't sleep, you know, you become really aware of your surroundings and you control everything and you can't think straight. So for me, panic attacks are very much kind of situational. But they got so bad at one point where they prevented me from being able to get to the back of a shop. You know, I used to get so angry in supermarkets that I couldn't. They put the bread and the milk at the back of the shop, and sometimes I couldn't get far enough into the shop to buy the bread, you know, and that really that was really hard work. So I guess I got over it in time, and then kind of during that time I was in my own therapy, and then I became a therapist kind of based on that whole experience. So depression
and it's hugely important to be able to say, look, I've been pushed to that limit as well.
Yeah,
isn't it? It's so important. To what extent do you offer that reassurance to your client, or do you feel you've always got to go into the realm of your own experience? Can there be, like I always used to do that when I was talking to someone. I used to try and show empathy by saying, oh, I know what you mean. I've been there too. And on one or two occasions, you'd find that the person then would switch off because they didn't want the empathy. They didn't want the sympathy either, but they didn't want your experience. They wanted only to talk about theirs. And that's a whole other issue as well, isn't it? That, you know, learning when not to say anything. I'm really only learning that now. But sometimes you have to let them to learn to listen. It's really hard to learn to listen, isn't it?
It is. I tell you, it's hard work. You know, it takes a lot of, you know, really acute kind of skill, and it really depends on the relationship with the client, and if they're early in therapy or if they're late in therapy, or, you know, if you've built a kind of nice relationship. I'm not big on personal disclosure, but I would say, you know, particularly with anxiety, you know, I came into therapy because of my own lived experience of anxiety. So a part of me can identify with what you're going through, you know. So, yeah.
And I think that is a very important message to communicate to people, because I know when I started to get panic attacks, and they hit when I was about 20. And I had migrated, and I had fallen underweight, hugely underweight, not through an eating disorder, but through getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning in a different country, learning a new language and on a different diet. And I didn't see the weight fall off me. I hadn't a car. I was having to get at 6 o'clock train in the morning to get me into work for 8:30, and then finishing work at 9 at night. And it was just a sheer grind. I dropped the weight, but I didn't see it fall off so fast, and I felt so far below my minimum weight that it was affecting it set up this panic situation, because I was on a roller coaster that went on for years as a very, very young woman. And I can remember that kind of being so engrossed in that experience that I didn't realize what was happening. And I wonder at times whether it's, if you are pushed to a particular point, whether that is the trigger for a lot of these conditions that we today tend to keep labeling as, even if the label is true, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder or PTSD or whatever. We love our labels these days, which has a drawback. But I just wonder to what extent that that everybody, I think, has that limit, don't they? That point, and they may not know it beforehand. They have to reach it before they know it. But for you to say to your client, look, I have had this experience, I think it's really important, because when I was then trying to find help myself, I found myself sitting in front of counselors or psychologists or whatever who never said a word. They were the other extreme. And I found I couldn't build rapport.
Yeah.
But you have to have some connection. You have to build a conversation.
Yeah, it's true. And like that initial like that, the initial reach out to say to somebody, something's happened to me, but I don't know what, there are very few opportunities where somebody has the time to actually sit with you. I didn't have great experiences with GPs, and they said things that like actually significantly escalated how I was coping at that time. So to be able to just say to somebody, like when they come in for one session, I take notes all through my sessions, and I tell them at the start, I'm going to take notes, so and I'm slowly writing away, all of these factors, significant triggers, and when I read it back to them, they always say, wow, gosh, I just, when someone reads back all the things that you're going through, and then there's anxiety, and then there's panic attacks, they're like, God, yeah, I really am going through a lot, haven't I? They just, because we're just so used to just going, kind of functioning all the time. And I think it's the other thing about stress, there's lots of talk about mental health, but really I would love, we were just talking about stress and that kind of long-term stress. And like, if you think of how I was explaining to young people, you kind of have to change language depending on age as well, like with younger people, is like, if your range of stress is between 0 to 10 and you're at an 8 all the time, it's not going to take much to push you over the edge and have a panic attack. You've only kind of like a 9 and a 10 before it pushes you into a space of just not being able to cope, just totally overstimulated and maybe hyperventilating or whatever. So I think just being able to give them the space to talk through what's actually happening to them, it's quite beneficial. It's very healing.
And they will take time to find the words, won't they?
Oh yeah, a long time. That's the thing with therapy, it's about the relationship, and if you can stay in therapy long enough to develop that relationship, then you can really do good quality work. We're kind of in a fixing culture though, it's like the therapist will fix me, and I go and do 1 or 2 sessions and I don't feel better. So that's also a part of this work, is trying to manage expectations.
Can you just talk to us about your thoughts on that for a moment? As you say, we're in that kind of culture where you expect the therapist to kind of come up with something within 3 sessions. And really it is a joint conversation, and it is an exploration of what's happening, and it takes a long time to get a person to flick the switch and realize that, right, we need to give this time.
Yeah.
And they're probably worried about finances, and they're probably worried about the immense time constraints they're under. And perhaps they're in a naysayer mindset on many things, or perhaps they're feeling very, you mentioned shame a lot.
Yeah.
They're feeling shame. Where do you begin then to get them talking positively about themselves? How hard is that as a therapist?
It's a good question. I don't think I have a straight answer for that one. But I find that when people start therapy, they talk about themselves and the family and the practical stuff and the work. It takes time to get them to actually connect with the emotions, because addiction is very much in the mind, thinking, seeking out, So it takes quite some time to get people to actually come into their body, and connect with the feelings and connect with the emotions. Shame is something that we talk about in therapy, but it takes a long time for people to actually get, this is shame, and even around depression, there's a lot of shame around depression or having panic attacks or just not being able to cope.
Yes.
There is, I don't know if you experience that,
There is, because what you do is you start saying, and I'm sure that this can be transferred to other issues, not so much panic attacks, or not only panic attacks and PTSD, but other areas as well, that you start saying to yourself, well, look, I'm strong, I'm a confident person. Why is this happening to me? And you start over questioning, and you'll, that can be repeated in the associated areas as well, not just panic attacks that you might have, if it's something else you have.
It's so true. And I think, when we're talking to maybe friends or family, there's not always a great depth to that, so some of those much stronger emotions, kind of shame, regret, loss, like, it takes time for someone to start opening up about that, and to be able to kind of talk about it. So in therapy, yeah, I mean, that kind of work comes a little bit further down the line, but some people are just really self-aware and they're like, this is exactly what I feel, and I need to get this off my chest. I have found there are certain issues maybe where, I mean, shame is obviously much more profound, and given the space, most people do open up. But kind of back to the fixing culture, if someone wants, I just need this fixed, I just need it done, I don't want to have to come back in 3 weeks, you're never going to get to that deeper work. That's longer term work as opposed to long term work.
So is that why you have here on the bullet point list that you've got, I notice you've got very specific tags, like for example, take the last one there, well-being consultations. Is that a way of directing a client to actually look at why it is they might want to contact you, and look at it in a kind of a more focused way? Yeah, I really do feel I want to just look at my well-being, and that might involve looking at perhaps wellness and spirituality. Is that what is so useful, just from a business perspective too? Is that what putting all of the lists of and content lists on of what you do, like specifically stress management, specifically anger management, are they guides basically to help people identify? Because if someone just comes to you and contacts you and says, I'd like a session, well, they have to know where to begin. They have to have some idea of what they feel is at the top of their list, don't they? So to what extent do you find the lists help you?
What I find, I do a huge amount of work with men, actually, and not a lot of men around kind of sexual recovery, just difficulties with relationships. Obviously, pornography is just frightening how big of an issue that is. So people will often schedule a session and they're like, I just need to talk to someone about, getting better, or like that, my well-being. And it's the step in the door. It's like testing the water, and then can I trust this person? Can I open up more? And then I might say, my wife says I have a problem with pornography. So there's relationship issues. Yeah, there's relationship issues. And maybe then there might be alcohol. Then there could be going on for 20 years, So in that first session, I guess I'm very direct in the way that I kind of work with people. And my kind of background is also in complementary health therapy. So in that first session, I'm kind of probe, how's your sleep? How's your stress levels? Are you eating much? How are you coping on a day-to-day basis? Like, are there things that are bothering you? So it's kind of just like, it's a nice, safe way to start a conversation maybe about how they are on themselves, what's wrong. And then it takes a little bit of time for them to come in and then go, actually, there's something I did want to talk about. So I think our role as therapists is just providing that space and making it safe, but also not being afraid to say, tell me more about that. Is there anything that you're uncomfortable talking about? And just really allowing them the space to get into things, particularly around sexual issues, because to know where really we can go to talk about sexual issues. I think we're great at joking about them as Irish people and minimizing or telling stories, but actually properly talking about maybe sexuality. There's no real safe space to do that. So therapy is really where people pour and channel all their energy into trying to understand that for themselves, and it impacts on everything.
It does. And to what extent would you're working globally, you've got clients from all kinds of different countries, do you find that there's a difference culturally in their approach to, for example, pornography or sex addiction issues? Would you find that the cultural aspect plays a part?
Even though I work globally, almost all my clients are Irish. But within that, there are societal and kind of cultural challenges. So I'm in my 40s. a lot of my clients with sexual issues in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Actually, I had a lady who was in her 90s, you know, talking about what it was like to have a lack of intimacy in her life. So like, we were all brought up with very mixed messages about intimacy, you know, and about pregnancy and not getting pregnant and like body image, you know, all the language. So even in people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they're still very influenced by that. And even though people might be married maybe 10, 20, 30 years, they may have never actually had a conversation about sex and intimacy with a partner. So like the cultural and social aspect has a big impact just on our very personal relationships. So I definitely see that an awful lot. And it goes the opposite way then. You know, we have a perception around pornography. Well, all men watch pornography. And so like young men are hearing this message over and over and over again. And a lot of my clients have been doing pornography for over 20 years. That's not unusual, you know, or over 10, 15 years. So just starting to have like a real authentic conversation around that. They don't really get a space to do that. So society and culture and sex education, all of that, I really see that in my work now with clients, definitely. All those negative messages and misinformation. So that always comes into this type of work around sexuality.
And you mentioned pregnancy counselling. Has that changed over the years? Has it gone from being just generally giving the postnatal care speech, dealing with women who might have postnatal depression? Has it expanded into other areas now? Because I often feel that, you know, for young women, there isn't an awful lot that they are told about what it might be like to be pregnant or to have, you know, to go on that journey. They're in it before. You know, counseling on that, I would say, is a vast area in itself.
It is, yeah, it's a huge area, and we're really lucky that women have so many apps and they can track pregnancy and they can be privy to real expert information. I guess where I see most of my work around pregnancy would be where there have been fertility issues, you know, so there might have been a lot of loss or maybe miscarriage, and these kind of things put strain on their relationship, and then fear of loss of a pregnancy or maybe diagnosis during pregnancy. So the woman's trying to cope with that, and there's huge immense anxiety comes with pregnancy, you know, worrying, will I be able to cope with the birth, or how will I cope as a mother? My own childhood wasn't great. So you're right, it's quite a huge area.
And a fear of pregnancy, I notice as well. Like that was something that was never talked about years ago, but there are women who have a fear of pregnancy, and getting to the bottom of what that fear could be. And for some people, it can be a very terrifying thing. I have a grandmother who had that, and she had her children in the 1930s. I don't know how she coped because she had no help, you know, to deal with that. You know, there are all kinds of things that are associated with hormonal changes, and they need counselling, talk therapy as well for that.
Yeah, and because I guess postnatal depression and the different levels of it is very prevalent, it's a really great exercise to maybe spend, even if it's just 2 or 3 sessions, talking about how are you now, how are you going to cope with the labor, you know, what to ask your partner to watch out for. Maybe if you're very vulnerable to maybe depression, that there may be more of a prevalence, you know, in those first couple of months. And just, I guess you're just bringing an awareness to the fact that maybe you might develop some postnatal depression, but maybe you won't. Maybe you'll be absolutely fine, and you'll be all loved up, you know. Yeah, so just, I guess it's about kind of developing that kind of self-awareness and reflection. But like that with depression, it creeps in and you just can't see that happening. So sometimes we have to tell our partners, the people around us, you know, I need you to watch out for me because I can't always see this coming.
That is a very, very good thing to draw to people's attention, because then in having that awareness and those safeguards almost in place, you've got to trust them then when they say it back to you, which is also, sometimes you might rattle a cage and say, I'm fine. Why are you saying that to me now?
Yeah.
But in fact, they're doing the right thing. You've told them prior to this to tell you if they see
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
makes them concerned. So listen to them. That's one thing, isn't it? But also, I think if you're aware, if you're having a conversation and that conversation is being built up ahead of the big
Mm.
events, then you
Yeah.
just don't feel alone.
That's it.
Just don't feel
Yeah.
so alone.
Yeah.
It's akin to the pandemic in some respects, in that we might be, our worlds have shrunk in some respects, but in
Mm.
other ways, due to technology, we are in we are in contact, particularly maybe more women than men. We're
Mm.
in more contact now with our friends in England and our friends in the States and our friends in China and our family and wherever. So we're all having these conversations, perhaps at a slightly deeper level than before because of the
Mm.
situation we're in.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't feel quite as alone. And yet at the
Yeah.
same time, I have found with friends, thankfully I've never suffered from depression, but the panic attacks were a huge part of my life. But I can identify with some of my friends some language that they're using that I find um, is a red flag.
Yeah.
When I hear them saying, I don't care anymore. It's over. I don't care anymore.
Apathy. Mm.
When you hear these phrases being repeated, to what extent should we take that as being not so much a red flag, but maybe an orange one, you know?
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people saying, if I go, I go. I don't care anymore. This my life is over.
Yeah. Yeah. How
It's
do you
tough.
deal with them? I mean, the reason I think it's really tragic, the situation that we kind of have maybe in our culture. Like, the reason people like me and psychotherapists are so busy is because um, maybe we haven't developed the skills of listening and hearing, and just sitting with somebody in their emotions. And so they have to go and pay somebody to do that. And an awful lot of cultures don't have that because they talk all the time and they have family around them all the time and they're all connected and they know everything about everybody and they really know each other on an emotional level. So when you see someone who's quite apathetic, I think you just really need to get better at saying, are you okay? Is there anything you want to talk about? Can I help you? Or just say, I see that you don't quite seem to be yourself, but it's a skill to kind of learn that, like tuning in and just checking in and just being okay with other people not being okay, and just say, look, I'm here for you. Anytime you need to talk, I'm here. Because that apathy, it's a little bit dangerous at times, the kind of ambivalence. I don't care. And I mean, that is one of the traits of depression, isn't it? It's not that they don't care. It's just that they don't have the energy to care, that they just struggle because they're so busy trying to function that I can't think about things too far outside of, what's happening in my day-to-day life. It's not that I don't want to, it's just that I don't have that capacity. So language is really important to check in with people around that.
And
Not be worried.
when we hear our friends or our acquaintances coming out on a regular basis, like somebody can say it once and it might be anything, but if you hear it consistently coming from people, I suppose the temptation is to jump in there and try and fix it in some way.
Yeah.
What would you say to people who feel, oh, I've got to do something and I've got to say something, and how should they approach this? What would your best recommendation be in the immediate situation that when they've heard that? And then what's the best way for them to direct the individual towards someone like yourself who will have a gentle approach, but has the know-how, has the understanding and the skills?
Yeah.
Where do you begin?
I think everything in human nature comes down to connection, connect, the hand on the shoulder, the eye contact. They're just the physically being present with them, ask them, do you want to come for a coffee? Or, just tuning in and just connecting with them and saying, I just noticed that you don't quite see yourself. Do you want to talk?
Yeah, and even just grab your cup of coffee over Zoom or over and have I would also say to people, actually, schedule a proper Zoom, sit down Zoom, not just on your phone, but with somebody, sit down, have a cup of tea. And one of the things I would just throw in, if I may, is guys, remember when you're talking to your friend and if they're a bit low, it's very tempting to look at like if I look at you now on my screen, uh, I'm looking away from the camera.
Okay.
Look at the camera because that's where your friend is. Look at the camera. And if you've got an independent camera like I have, you've just got to remind yourself to do that because you need to make eye contact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact,
Crucial.
do you know something, Orla? What I find, I don't know if you find this when you're doing your sessions too, but if you do that, you're actually listening better.
Yeah, it's just this wonderful non-verbal communication, and there are so many ways to communicate and really connect and like have an intimate bond with somebody. Think of intimacy as sexual intimacy, but just being present and kind of being there and just saying, I see you, like I see that you're in pain or that you're struggling or, and sometimes it's trying to pull them out of the situation, say, why don't you come and do something different with me? Why don't you come to my house? Or why don't, we just go and do something together? Or, but maybe when people are struggling, they do find it difficult to do things outside of the ordinary. Their energy is often just very, very low and, we kind of go into hibernation mode. And you know what, that's okay too. But I think we also need to be better at, not worrying about talking about things like suicide, or are you looking after yourself? Are you eating? Are you having a lot of bad thoughts? Not to be afraid of having these conversations, because look, like suicide rates are quite high, and they are very high and equally high in women. So to be able to just say, I am worried about you, and if you ever need to talk to me about anything, I'm here. It doesn't matter what time it is. So that connecting all the time.
Are they equally high now with women?
I don't think so. I think it's still very, very high for women, for men obviously, but for women, I think, yeah. And then like at the moment, a lot of issues around women with alcohol. That's obviously a huge problem at the moment, particularly with the pandemic. So I'm definitely seeing more and more women come for counselling to talk about how they're coping or maybe how much they're drinking. And of course, that impacts the mental and emotional health. And the nature of addiction is that it takes people away, it makes them disconnect from loved ones. And you can start to see that kind of apathy that you're talking about there. No, I'm fine, I'm okay. And depression, the slow pulling away out of their usual social circle. And so it's a very lonely place to be.
So when you're working with a client,
Mm-hmm.
do you give them worksheets, homeworks? Does it operate that way? Is there a journal that they will follow just to help keep them more conscious of their moods, their responses to things?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really, like, I would consider myself like an integrative therapist. So I really draw strongly on resources, workbooks, podcasts. And I think I'm always trying to look at the client and see what are you into? What works for you? Do you exercise? Are you a reader? Are you good at writing? And really draw on that, kind of bring that into their life. With recovery, there are lots of things that we just know work. The likes of journaling, the being in therapy, the group work, some of the couples therapy, like educating yourself about maybe what you're going through. So I would be very resource focused. But then that depends on the client. If they have a lot of stress or they're a young mother or a chaotic life, me giving them work is going to make them second guess. But if I go to her, she's going to give me something to do. So I don't want any more stress in my life. So we just have to be really kind of aware of what's going on for them, what they're coping.
Where you give them control of what's going to happen. So they come into the session with you and you reassure them that they're in control.
Yeah.
And that, look, they can draw from this resource selection if they wish.
Mm-hmm.
They probably then want to do it more because of that, because they feel they're in control.
And particularly with recovery, what we're trying to say is, okay, this is the dependency, this is recovery, and so you can't just go with abstinence and willpower alone. You need to reinforce that kind of change in behaviors with lots of other things, like the journaling, like maybe going for a run, or meeting friends, looking after your diet, meditation. So the focus doesn't become about the abstinence and the willpower. It's about like building all of these other new kind of skills and exercises and things to do. So just makes it much easier. And I think we all like a sense of control,
And having then support from other people in the house, because of course there is the situation, for example, in the pandemic, where you might be in a house of naysayers who will say, "Oh, it's
Yeah,
not about it," or who have that attitude, even if they don't say it, they have the attitude about them, and the behavior is saying, "I can't really say anything to my dad, or I know I
yeah,
can't really go there with my husband because he's not really up into this sort of thing." Um,
yeah,
so finding the right people in your house to connect with, this is
yeah,
very hard too. You can be
yeah,
very lucky, but you can be very unlucky. And if there's someone in
yeah,
the house in a lot of pain, or if they may not be their true selves at the moment, so that can add to things too. You do couples therapy, and I notice you talk about the Gothman Approach, and
yeah.
it looks very, very interesting. Can you just tell us about this? Because I'd never heard of the Gothman approach
Oh,
until I
really?
saw you.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. I'm actually quite new to Gothman couples therapy. I discovered it about 3 years ago from a colleague of mine. Once I heard about this, it was like my mind was totally blown, and I've really brought it into my practice. So, John and Julie Gottman are two clinicians in the USA, and they've been studying couples for, I think, 40 years now. And they have really started by studying divorce and separation. And through studying divorce and separation, they were able to start looking at, okay, we can study this. So if people are getting divorced and separated, let's study the couples who have succeeded in relationships, who are together 10, 20, 30 years. And so they've compiled all of this amazing kind of scientific data and research, and they've created their own approach to saying to couples, look, if you want a good quality relationship, then these are all of the types of things that help couples stay together. Not be amazing, not be Hollywood, but good enough. They're really into the good enough relationship. And so the Gothman method is really about kind of having a couple in, you do an assessment, and then you work with them through all of these different types of approaches. So let's say it's based on, having trust and commitment in a relationship. They're the pillars of a marriage or a relationship. And then building love maps, which is getting to know each other, developing friendship. Then we have all of these traits around, showing appreciation, sharing life dreams, kind of supporting one another. So they call it the sound relationship house. So what they're saying to a couple is, okay, through the assessment, they do a big online assessment, which is a huge part of couples therapy. And as a clinician, that's really important for us, because ordinarily a couple might come in and you're just trying to go on the information that they are giving you in the room, and they're very flooded, so you can't really get into detail with what are the specific issues for each individual and for the couple. So we get a clinician's report through the assessment, and then we say, okay, you're doing good in these 2 areas, but these 4 areas, conflict resolution, there are a lot of issues there. You can also see maybe if there's any addictions, you can see maybe if there's issues around intimacy, you can see. So really getting into the detail and the nitty-gritty of what's working and what's not working. So the Gothman method is helping couples just work through everything that's going on for them with the assessment, and giving them lots of exercises, and I guess teaching them the language of how they talk to each other or don't talk to each other. Because we have this lovely saying in couples therapy that couples often over communicate, as opposed to just sitting with each other, just sitting with the issues. Why are you feeling that? Just trying to get to know each other. And one of the problems with being a couples therapist is people come to therapy too late. They're not even friends a lot of the time. They don't even like each other. So with the Gothman method, what they're trying to say is, look, you're in a relationship, great. How about we make it better? You know, rather than waiting until the very, very end, where the relationship is broken down so much that they just don't want to do the work. You know, they don't feel loved and they don't feel appreciated or anything. So I guess the Gothman method approach is for couples who are in conflict, who want to reconnect and be better, or for couples who just want to learn how to have a healthier relationship. And maybe the reason that I loved it so much is when I was growing up, I didn't really see many happy couples. You know, I didn't really see many happy marriages, and that was very scary. You know, I'm not sure what your experience was, but I grew up looking around thinking, like,
God, this is an endurance test.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, what's the point in this? So, and I wish I knew the Gothman method when I was younger, because I'd be in a very different place maybe now, in the sense that I wouldn't be so fearful of relationships. You know, it's a wonderful thing to be able to read a book and go, oh yeah, gosh, that's great, I can do that. You know, I can show appreciation, or sit with my partner, or, you know, talk about life dreams. So that's really the approach. It's structured and it's very specific, and couples love that. You know, they love knowing that they're in a process and they can work through something. I think it's really important for couples to feel that, because otherwise it can just feel like, who knows where this couple session's going to go today. You know, that's scary for people to go into sessions feeling that way.
Yeah, it is. And like, there's another type of therapy as well that you do, although I suppose it's not separate, but just for the sake of the conversation, we could deal with it as separate. Couples in addiction, helping each other get over an addiction, or one person in the couple helping the other person get over an addiction.
Yeah.
How different is that to Gothman? I mean, do the two overlap in any way, or do you treat them separately?
It's very, very different work, you know. So if it's a couple where there's no addiction, like, the couple come in and the couple is my client. Whereas when you are working with someone who has an addiction, I'm usually working with that one person, and we bring their partner in every now and then. Or maybe the couple will come in, one person is in an addictive state or is moving towards recovery, and they might have their own personal therapy. So the couple who are in recovery from addiction, I guess, is very much psychoeducational. We're not talking about problems specifically within the relationship. You know, we're not talking about relationship problems. We're talking about how the addiction is impacting on the couple, and how they can support each other to get into a place where eventually they can work on the relationship issues. You know, the first thing that has to be kind of focused on is getting that person into a space of recovery and stable, because they're so chaotic. You know, they can't actually they don't have the capacity to work on the relationship, because it's just too much going on. So it's very much about psychoeducational, talking about addiction, talking about recovery, really managing expectations. And the thing about recovery is the partner is so abandoned. You know, they really need support. And we have a bit of a problem with the system here. When one person is ill with an addiction, they go off to rehab for 10 or 12 weeks. And if I won the lotto, I would have a rehab for partners where they go off there for 6 weeks or 4 weeks, because they need it so much, because actually they're the one dealing with the addiction, whereas the other person is active in their addiction. So
yes,
huge trauma happening, and huge fatigue and burnout there as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If you were to give 3 pieces of advice to people at the moment, particularly those who are highly stressed, and perhaps a partner has addiction, maybe they feel they've developed an addiction in this pandemic. Yeah. Maybe they've developed an addiction to pornography in the time that they've been, you know, stuck at home. I mean, there'll be lots of people in that situation, won't there? What would you say to them if you were to give them a few pieces of advice? What would you say?
You mean the person who might have developed an addiction?
Well, actually, yeah, let's go there first, because I think there's probably a lot of people in that situation.
I think so, yeah. Maybe we talk a lot about addiction, but actually destructive behaviors and dependency is far more prevalent. It may not develop into full-blown addiction. I think I always kind of talk about, self-care, support, and sobriety. And even if you're not sure if you have a problem, just go talk to somebody. Go talk to somebody, go to a therapist, or that, we're actually quite lucky in Ireland. We have a huge amount of support groups. We have support groups for almost every issue, and they're on every day. And now that we have everything on Zoom, you can go to 2 meetings in a day from your house if you want. So that's really, really helpful. So I would definitely say, like, reach out, talk to somebody. Doesn't matter if you're not sure if it's the right therapist. If they're not, they will direct you to the right person. It all has to start with just talking about where you are.
And you're IACP, aren't you? You're
IACP.
accredited. So would you always recommend that the person that they seek out would be under the same accreditation?
So we have a good few organisations. So there's the IACP. I guess we have a lot of general counsellors, and then we have counsellors that specialise in specific areas. So, if you're looking for a therapist, do a little bit of research online. Try go with someone who works with addictions, to save yourself the time maybe being referred on, because they kind of know the questions to ask you. They'll be able to pick up a lot of things. We also have Addiction Counsellors Ireland. So there are a couple of different organisations, but definitely go with someone who's accredited. Absolutely. I would definitely go with, somebody who is under a governing body like the IACP. But be specific in who you're going to see. So we have a lot of general counsellors who just do broad general counselling, and they may not specialise in anything. And then we have like myself, I've made the decision to specialise, and I actually don't do general counselling. I would just refer on. I just stick to those areas. So definitely make the break. The first session is the scariest, but once you do that one, I think, God, it's such a relief to just open up and start talking to somebody and start to minimize the issue and just make it more real and not so scary.
Another area, though, just sorry to interrupt you on giving your advice there, just before I forget, the infidelity counselling as well. Would you always do that on a one-to-one, or would it be a couples issue as well, or is it both?
It could be both, so I think I usually use the term kind of betrayal. So an infidelity is generally seen as maybe a sexual infidelity. But I guess with social media and smartphones, it's really opened up the capacity for people to maybe experience betrayal and different levels of betrayal. So it might just be texting, maybe it might be just using pornography, but for a lot of people, like, that is a betrayal, so may not be an infidelity, but it's still a betrayal. And once that's there, it creates a lot of kind of betrayal trauma for partners. Something I'm really, really interested in this year is the whole area of betrayal trauma. And one person might say, oh, just get over it, but actually that person becomes traumatized, and that can go on and on and on for a long time, and it starts to break trust and cause a lot of problems. Infidelity is generally addressed as a couple. And with the Gothman method, they have a really nice method that you can work through with the couples. It's called atone, attune, and attach. So you work with them through a process of healing, which is lovely to have that nice structure and to let couples know we have a structure here. We could work through that, that there is a plan in place. So, and then some couples don't want to, the damage is done and the relationship is kind of moving towards an ending phase of some kind. But it's a really big area for me, the whole area of infidelity, betrayal, particularly with pornography and the problems that continues to cause. Can't see that ending anytime soon, unfortunately.
And the way it would affect children too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it has the capacity to end families and break up families, which is very tragic. And I do hear my clients just say, I didn't realize it would get to this. They just don't think.
Yeah, and that's why I worry about the pandemic at the moment, that there will be so many people who've fallen back on that late at night and got into weird stuff as well. But it's how do you extricate yourself from that situation?
Yeah,
It's a really tough one. I interrupted your advice there. So your second and third piece of advice for people at the moment, what would you suggest? And particularly, for example, if it's for people in business as well, what
Mhm.
would you recommend they keep to the forefront of their minds now in this pandemic?
One thing I've noticed is that some people who, have their own businesses can be more prone to maybe developing an addiction, and that's not antidotal by any means, but I guess they have more time. They don't have people to be accountable to. They can lose track of hours, or they don't have meetings to go to. They really can control their own agenda. So I would see a lot of my clients would work for themselves and would have developed maybe problematic behaviors or dependencies kind of through having the availability, accessibility, and opportunity. So they're kind of three of the factors that always come into play when it comes to kind of developing a problem around that. So the second piece of advice, oh my gosh, it's a good question. You're putting me on the spot here. I really think the education piece is huge. If you think you have an issue with pornography, start looking around and seeing well, unfortunately, we don't have a normal with pornography. It's quite hard to see, okay, well, what is normal? At least with alcohol, we can say, don't drink more than 15 or 18 units a week. But I get asked that question all the time, how much porn is too much porn? And my answer is usually, if you're asking me that question, probably is too much at the moment, if you're trying to measure. So really the psychoeducational piece, listen to some podcasts. There's some great podcasts about, recovery, gambling addiction. There's some super podcasts around. Just start listening and learning, is what's going on for me usual maybe as opposed to normal? Do I need to feel like this every day? Like what am I missing out on something? Just start that that's my third piece of advice, be around be self-reflective. Sit in what you're going through, maybe start writing a little bit, or just trying to connect with how is this impacting on my life now, and do I want this for myself? That's kind of bringing that nice spiritual element into it. Maybe you don't feel you have the capacity to change now, but at least allow yourself to think about what you do want.
Yeah.
Most people aren't really ready to get recovered, but a big part of them is. So we're that's the motivational interview. I'm trying to work with the part that is ready to move, but often on the fence for quite some time, and that's okay.
It is. It's okay. And I suppose for some people, the big warning can be if they become so distracted and scattered that they have an accident, which happened to a friend of mine only last week, or 10 days ago, that they were under such stress and so distracted by what was going on in their life. It wasn't a pornographic issue or anything like that. It was immense stress that they were being put under in a job, and suddenly they were in the middle of an accident.
Gosh,
It's those things. That's the worst case scenario where you're actually injured because of the distraction and the stress it's causing you. So really kind of gathering yourself and saying, okay, am I actually heading in that direction where I am now so distracted that it's no longer a noble thing to be so busy. It's actually possibly going to end up. And which I find now, I'm 57, I find I have to listen to that little voice in my head that says, okay, brakes on, slow down. Because if you do fall, or if you do have an accident, you're going to take much longer to recover.
Yeah, it's so true. And I guess with the whole area of destructive behaviors, there is a lot of capacity for destruction and damage, and in some cases being embroiled in kind of legal, maybe it could be separation, and maybe just charges against you, for whatever has kind of come about. So it's just trying to be a little bit reflective and say, if I keep going down this route, it's hard to be reflective at times, but if I keep this up, like, where am I going to end? But I do see people who have a dependency, they'll often say, well, I'm not an alcoholic, I'm not on the street, I'm I'm not a problem drinker. Like, I'm not walking to the shop buying bottles of vodka. So we have a perception of what an alcoholic or an addict is, but actually the reality is very, very different. And you could say the same about maybe depression or whatever it is. You know, the longer you're experiencing it, the slower it takes to kind of work out and, you know, really pull away from that. So this is kind of longer term work, and to try and embrace that, you know, really just embrace that process of change and trust in it.
And when you get to a point where people are, when they're sharing and they're making progress and they've got it now, they understand what the process is about and they're making headway, do you make a conscious effort to get them to bring fun into their life again, you know, to actually start embracing the fun?
Yeah, it's lovely. You know, it makes me smile. Even I have a lot of clients who are actually doing really well. You know, the pandemic has given them a space to just let go of the addiction and really embrace recovery. And it's a lovely thing to see their language changes, their body language changes, like they're more connected with family. And it's just such a lovely thing as a therapist to see somebody really, you know, I mean, change as a person. It doesn't happen all the time, you know, but it's lovely to see that. And there comes a point where you do have to say, don't get recovery burnout, because that can happen, and to try get them to just think about, you know, what would make you happy, you know, because maybe they never knew what it was, you know, maybe they never really did anything for themselves or allowed them space to be creative, or, you know, just, and some people, because of childhood, they were never encouraged to think about themselves, you know, or what they might like to be. Maybe it might be changing career or just doing a triathlon. You know, you're trying to get them to think about themselves in as a somebody of worth, you know, that is really deserving of kind of fun and just fulfillment and just, you know, having a sense of purpose in life. So I mean, we always hope that they'll get to that point in their recovery. Doesn't always work out like that, but there is a big need to focus on that at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I often feel that if parents don't show that they value who they are and can be creative and find themselves in their talents and in what they can do and make that mark for themselves, if it's in writing, if it's in engineering or whatever, if they can't actually do that for themselves, then their kids can't see the value of having talents. You know, if you see your mother or your father really making a go of what they're good at and finding themselves in that and adding value to themselves, then it makes sense to you. You've got your template.
Yeah, it's so true. And the whole area of parenting is changing so much. You know, I mean, I'm only new to being a parent. I'm still definitely learning, that's for sure. But we've so many more resources for parenting, kind of emotion-focused parenting. So I really hope that we will start to see the benefits to that, you know, and already are seeing the benefits to that. But like with people in recovery, I guess sometimes it is just starting small. You know, sometimes you're just trying to get them to move into the community or just, you know, do something different for themselves where they are experiencing new experiences. You know, that's very powerful. It's really powerful to have that and oh, that was okay. Yeah, I think I'll try that again. Or, you know,
yeah, and you remember that, yeah, my father, my mom, they maybe they had itchy feet, but they went out there and they enjoyed themselves, you know, and they, you know, if you see that going on, you might even criticize it when you're young, but later on you can say, well, yeah, you know what? They took the risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very lucky. My parents have a lot of really outdoorsy interests, so I was lucky to really develop that and have that space. And I guess once you're aware of something, you can use that to your advantage. You know, you can kind of,
even if you don't use it in the immediate, you know, time frame, you later on you can actually value it and it's there for you. What about between now, we're entering 2022. Where do you see your business going?
I am probably going to continue to only work online, actually.
Right.
And where am I seeing my business going? It's a really good question. I probably will keep focusing on the work that I'm focused on now, but maybe I'm going to try and do a lot of group work next year and a lot of group work online. That's where my focus is going to be. Because I notice in the whole area of recovery, going through the same thing with people, in early recovery over and over again. So I want to try to do that on a larger scale and maybe work with 6 or 8 people at a time. So I'm hoping to bring more group work online, and I'm working on 1 or 2 other projects, which is great. Back to the Women's Inspire group, is that you see women coming up with ideas and following through, and I think, gosh, yeah, that's great. Actually, I could do something like that.
Well, you've mentioned the Women's Inspire group there. The Women's Inspire Network is the group that you are part of, and it is an absolutely wonderful group. I'm part of it myself. How have you found that it has helped you?
Yeah, really helped me loads. I guess, like, first and foremost, I'm a mother of 2 very young children, and so it is isolating. So to be able to just log on and throw up a comment or connect with other people or be in kind of the networks and just throw out ideas. And it's because, I guess on one hand I'm a therapist, but I'm also, developing a business and a brand at the same time. So I guess I'm learning so much from other people. And really the confidence piece, it's great to see people thrive in their work, and like yourself doing all of your interviews, and you do some really great interviews, and it's just seeing other people doing that and going, yeah, gosh, actually maybe I have the capacity to follow on what all these other really amazing women are doing. And we really need to support women in business, and support women in general.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job. Listen, folks, Orlagh Gahan-Reid, have a look at her website. Have a look at what she has on offer, because it's absolutely the range of expertise. And as you can see, her approach is marvelous. There's nothing to be scared of going to counselling. Nothing to be scared of.
Yeah,
it's something
true.
that is so beneficial. You learn so much. You learn so much about yourself. You learn about other people. You learn how to listen. And it's a great journey. Even if you've gone with what you feel is a terrible issue or a scary issue, you can come out smiling. You can really, really enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
And everybody around you will benefit, and they will notice the change in you too. So get in touch with Orlagh Gahan-Reid here. Fantastic website, fantastic counsellor, great psychotherapist. Lovely to have had you on, Orlagh. I'm delighted you said yes and came on the show. You're so interesting. And listen, have a fantastic Christmas, and our best to all your clients.
Thanks a million, you too. I thought I'd wear red today, a little bit of a festive colour. So thank you. Have a lovely Christmas and New Year's.
Thank you so much, everybody. We will see you again. This is the last Business Block Talk show for Christmas 2021. So we'll see you again in 2022. Have a good Christmas and a great rest. Bye-bye, everybody.